Seems to me I have a choice. I have to choose between running for president and doing my job, keep the Supreme Court from moving in a direction that I believe to be truly harmful.
So that was then Senator Joe Biden dropping out of his first bid for the White House nearly 4 decades ago. And now Biden finds himself in a new moment that could define his legacy. And joining us now to discuss the latest developments this weekend is CNN senior political commentator and former senior advisor to President Obama, David Axelrod. David, nice to see you. So right after President Biden's interview aired Friday, you posted on X that he is dangerously out of touch. Why do you say that?
Well, because listening to the interview, he seemed to deny where he is in the race. He seems not to grasp what is the big concern that people have. You know, let me just say about the president, Pam, that his whole life he has overcome tremendous loss and tremendous odds. I mean, you know, his personal loss is well known, extraordinary and horrible, and he's fought his way back from that. He's fought his way back from political defeats and against the odds. And so his psyche is that he can beat anybody and any long odds. What he can't beat is Father Time, and that's really the concern here. It's not about his record. Every time he's asked about whether he can do the job until he's closer to 90 than 80, he says, well, look at what I did the last 4 years. That's just not the way it works. Donald Trump is a almost unprecedentedly a flawed candidate in so many ways, and represents, I do believe, as the president says, a real danger to democracy. But the one person that no one can outrun is Father Time. Mm-hmm. You know, Tom Brady won a Super Bowl 3 years ago, and he's out of football. Okay, why? Doesn't detract from his greatness or what he's done. It's just there are certain immutable facts of life, and those were painfully obvious on that debate stage. And the president just doesn't seem to he hasn't come to grips with it. He's not winning this race. He's more likely, if you just look at the data and talk to people around the country, political people around the country, it's more likely that he'll lose by a landslide than win narrowly this race. And if the stakes are as large as he says, and I believe they are, then he really needs to consider what the right thing to do here is.
It's interesting because you mentioned, you know, the fact that there's nothing you can do about age. It only goes in one direction, right? And what this comes down to is public perception as well. And a lot of people bring up, well, Trump is only a few years behind Biden. But when you look at the public perception in the polls, 42% of those polled said that Trump would be too old for office. 74% said that about Biden. And you have to wonder, we played that clip of when Joe Biden, when he was, you know, then senator, dropped out of the presidential race in 1987. I was speaking to Evan Osnos, that Biden biographer, recently, and he said, you know, he was pushed out of politics then. He's not going to be pushed out of politics again. Yes. That is one of the driving factors here of why he's digging in his heels. Is that how you see it as well? What else do you think is at play here with what you think is sort of a state of denial?
He should not view it as being pushed out of politics. Look, Pam, I really have a very high regard for Joe Biden. I served with him in the White House. I thought he was a great vice president. I was glad every day that he was there. He was an important voice in the Obama administration. I think he's done some historically important things, and history will be much kinder to him than voters are being right now. But the question is, what will his reputation be like? What will his legacy be if he persists in this race and loses badly, which is really possible at this point? You know, we elect presidents by the Electoral College. I know there are some polls that say, that speak otherwise, but I've looked at a ton of data, and no one in those states who is knowledgeable would say he's ahead in any of the battleground states. But now you have states like Virginia, Minnesota, Maine. The governors of New Mexico and Maine reportedly told him in that meeting last week that they're not sure he can carry their states, which were presumed to be in his column. So he could lose and take the House and the Senate with him. That's not the legacy that he wants. He has a great record and a great history. So I think if that's what he's thinking, he's looking at this the wrong way. The only thing that's pushing him out of politics is the immutable march of time.
So he was asked by George Stephanopoulos about this prospect of what if you lose to Trump? And here's what he said. Let's listen.
And if you stay in and Trump is elected and everything you're warning about comes to pass, how will you feel in January?
I feel as long as I gave it my all and I did the goodest job as I know I can do. That's what this is about.
In this moment we're in right now, do you think Biden is putting country above self?
Yeah, well, this is not what this moment is about. This moment is about exactly what he has described. You know, Donald Trump doesn't believe in rules or laws or norms or institutions. He's already shown that he's willing to flout even the most sacred laws, the most sacred norms of our democracy by trying to overturn a free and fair election. And you know, so there's more at stake than whether or not Joe Biden feels at the end of the day that he gave it his all. If his all is not enough, maybe someone else can give more because they have more energy and they have a longer runway in the future.
All right, David Axelrod, thanks for sharing some of your time with us on this Sunday morning. Great to see you.
Great to see you, Pam. Thank you.